By 7:14 a.m., the barn Silas Whitfield's grandfather built in 1961 was already lying in pieces on the frozen ground, and the demolition crew was already packing up their equipment to leave. Silas stood in his bathrobe at the edge of what used to be 100 years of family history, holding a coffee mug he had forgotten he was still holding, staring at a pile of splintered timber where his father's tools, his grandmother's canning shelves, and 3 generations of harvest records had been stored the night before. The foreman handed him a clipboard without meeting his eyes and said only that the association had authorized the removal of an unpermitted structure, and that Silas should direct any questions to the board office once it opened. Stay with Silas as one clerical error unravels into a fraud scheme that had already stolen millions from families exactly like his. Silas Whitfield was 54 years old, a retired structural engineer who had spent 30 years signing off on buildings other people trusted with their lives, and he had moved back to Cedar Hollow Farms 2 years earlier to restore the barn his grandfather raised by hand on land that had never once belonged to any homeowners association until the county rezoned the outer parcels in 2019. He was not a man who raised his voice. He read contracts twice. He kept receipts. And when Hallmark Ridge Community Association sent him a letter 8 months earlier claiming his barn sat 9 feet over a setback line, he had done exactly what any careful man would do. He hired his own surveyor at his own expense and proved them wrong. The survey Silas commissioned showed the barn sitting entirely within his property, more than 40 feet clear of any line the association could claim jurisdiction over. He mailed a copy to the board, along with a polite letter reminding them, as he had already told them in person, that Cedar Hollow's original 90 acres, including his barn, predated the association's charter by 6 decades and had been expressly excluded from its authority in the annexation agreement. HOA President Desmond Calloway read that letter standing in his office at Hallmark Ridge, and according to his assistant, he did not respond to it. He simply set it down, picked up his phone, and made a call to a demolition contractor named Perry Tullis, a man who had done 3 other jobs for Desmond that year, jobs that had never once appeared on any board. Desmond Calloway was 51 years old, the kind of man who wore a blazer to a homeowner's picnic and had built Hallmark Ridge into what the local paper once called the fastest appreciating community in the county, a phrase Desmond had framed and hung behind his desk. What the paper never printed was that Hallmark Ridge's reserve fund had lost 11% of its value over the previous 3 years, or that Desmond personally sat on the board of the insurance brokerage that handled every structure claim filed by the association. The night before the demolition, Desmond sent a single text to Perry Tullis that read only, "Address confirmed. Same as before. In and out before sunrise." Neither man knew that Silas's new driveway camera, installed the week before after a string of mailbox thefts on his road, was already recording everything. Silas called the county building department first, expecting the confusion to resolve itself within a day. Instead, a clerk named Renata Ibarra pulled the file and told him carefully that no demolition permit had ever been issued for his address. Not that morning, not that month, not that year. Then who authorized this? Silas asked, and Renata's answer, after a long pause, was that the paperwork on file listed the property owner's name as Hallmark Ridge Community Association, Parcel 14, a parcel that, according to the county's own records, did not exist. Desmond agreed to see Silas that afternoon, flanked by the association's property manager, Yolanda Price, and he opened the conversation with an apology so smooth it almost worked. A regrettable clerical overlap, he called it, blaming a contractor error and a mislabeled work order for a mix-up between Silas's address and an actual condemned structure 2 roads over. He offered Silas a check on the spot, $40,000, drawn from the association's discretionary account, to make this right quietly and quickly. Silas did not take the check. He had spent 30 years reading structural reports written to sound reasonable while hiding exactly what they were built to hide, and he recognized the shape of one the moment he heard it. Instead of cashing anything, Silas drove to the county recorder's office and requested every demolition permit and insurance claim filed by Hallmark Ridge Community Association for the past 5 years. What came back stopped him cold. 7 other structures, barns, sheds, and 1 detached garage, had been accidentally demolished across 3 neighboring communities, every single one of them owned by residents who had recently disputed a board ruling, and every single one of them followed within 60 days by an insurance payout filed under the association's master policy, a policy Desmond Calloway had personal signing authority over. Silas took the pattern to a friend from his engineering days, an insurance fraud investigator named Corbin Ash who had spent 15 years untangling exactly this kind of scheme. Corbin explained it plainly over coffee. The association wasn't demolishing barns by accident, and it wasn't demolishing them out of spite either. It was demolishing them to trigger structure loss claims on policies the association itself controlled, then quietly diverting a portion of every payout through a shell property management company Desmond had formed 2 years earlier, a company that, Corbin discovered within a day, was paying Desmond Calloway a consulting fee every single month. When Desmond learned that Silas had gone to the county recorder instead of taking the check, he changed tactics. He had Yolanda Price send a formal notice claiming Silas himself had forged the survey proving his barn's boundary, threatening a defamation lawsuit if Silas repeated his false accusations to anyone else in the community. Standing in his kitchen holding that letter, Silas felt something shift in him. Not anger exactly, but the particular, focused calm of a man who had just realized the people trying to silence him had no idea how much documentation he already had. Silas handed everything to Corbin and to a state insurance fraud unit that Corbin had worked with for a decade. The driveway footage of Perry Tullis's crew arriving before dawn, the non-existent parcel number on the demolition paperwork, the pattern of 7 prior accidental demolitions, and the shell company quietly funneling money back to Desmond every month. 2 weeks later, investigators executed a search warrant on Hallmark Ridge's management office and on Desmond Calloway's home, seizing 11 years of financial records the board had never once been shown in full. The twist investigators uncovered went further than even Corbin had expected. Desmond hadn't started this scheme alone, and he hadn't started it with barns. 11 years earlier, as a junior board member at a different HOA across the county, Desmond had been quietly forced out after a nearly identical clerical demolition was traced back to him. A case that had been settled privately, sealed, and never made public, allowing him to simply move to a new community and start again. This time as president instead of a junior board member with something to prove. At trial, Perry Tullis testified that Desmond had paid him in cash for each demolition, always specifying a resident who had recently challenged a board decision, always insisting the work happen before sunrise. Corbin's financial reconstruction showed the shell company had funneled $1.9 million out of insurance payouts over 5 years, money that should have gone to genuine repairs, reduced dues, or the association's badly depleted reserve fund. The court found Desmond guilty on multiple counts of insurance fraud, forgery, and conspiracy, and ordered him to personally repay every dollar diverted, on top of a civil judgment covering the full cost of rebuilding Silas's barn, restitution to the 7 other affected families, and punitive damages the judge described as necessary to make clear that a position of community trust is not a license to steal from the very neighbors who granted it. The total financial judgment reached $9,300,000. Hallmark Ridge's entire board was removed and replaced under court-ordered outside oversight, with new bylaws requiring any demolition or insurance claim over $5,000 to be approved by a resident vote and reviewed by an independent auditor. Silas used part of his settlement to rebuild the barn exactly as his grandfather had built it, board for board, using photographs his father had taken decades earlier, and true to the old design, he added one thing that hadn't existed before: a small brass plaque by the door, engraved with nothing but a date and 4 words, "Rebuilt after they tried." Months later, standing in the doorway of the finished barn with Corbin beside him, Silas said he didn't think Desmond had ever once believed a retired engineer with a habit of keeping receipts would be the one who finally caught him. He said Desmond had spent 11 years learning how to make destruction look like an accident, but never once learned that the quietest people are usually the ones who write everything down. As the sun set over Cedar Hollow, the barn's new tin roof caught the last light exactly the way the old one had. A structure meant to hold hay and tools, standing now as something else entirely. A reminder that some lines, once drawn, are not the boards to erase.
If you've ever had someone try to weaponize against you, leave a comment below. Tell me what happened. Tell me how it ended. And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.